I'm so frustrated with my hair right now. I braided it last night, hoping to like, knowing I wanted to curl my hair today, hoping that it would give me like the mermaid vibes and then I could just add some curls in. That is not how it wants to crop braid today, so it's up. And I honestly, like, I literally, I want to cry. I don't think there's any saving what's going on, so it is what it is. But I literally have like something that I wanted my hair to look nice for, and it's just not going to. All right, you guys, I'm super excited for today's video. Definitely more excited for the video than I am for my hair right now. But today we're gonna be ranking every single eyeshadow palette that I no pan left behind this year. I do have a caveat to that. I no pan left behind it just about every new eyeshadow that entered my collection this year, which was about 47 or so eyeshadow palettes. And I recently ranked every single eyeshadow palette that I tried for the first time this year. I'll leave that linked. It'll be in my palette playlist. So I'm not going to be including those eyeshadow palettes in the ranking because I was like, that's going to be 47 plus 29, 6 carry the 1, 76 eyeshadow palettes, and I just was not in the mood to rank 76 eyeshadow palettes. So if you're interested in how I would rank the palettes that were new to my collection, you can check that video out. I know that that won't then tell you where those palettes compared to palettes that were currently in my collection, but it is what it is. If you guys don't know what no pan left behind means, it means that I used every single shade in each of these eyeshadow palettes at least one time. And I will definitely be doing this project again next year and hoping to get through even more of my eyeshadow palette collection because I had so much fun doing this year. I feel like I really got to know my eyeshadow palettes in a different light, and it worked really well for me, and it's something that I definitely plan to do again in 2024. So if you're interested in how I would rank these 29 eyeshadow palettes, stay tuned. First, if you have yet to subscribe to my channel and you like project painting content, palette themed content. I forgot to mention we're in the middle of palette week. How could I forget? Every single day for 7 straight days, I am posting some sort of palette themed content, and I love talking about eyeshadow palettes. So if you like eyeshadow palette content, I hope you consider subscribing before moving on. And other than that, let's jump into the video. Okay, you guys. We're gonna kick it off with an eyeshadow palette that if you caught my palette collection declutter, you know I will be getting rid of this one. It's the ColourPop Making Mouse palette. This palette smells like Play-Doh. Unfortunately, I believe this palette to be expired, which rare is the day I actually have an eyeshadow palette that I open that I'm like, yep, that smells like it's expired. So that's sad, that's disappointing. And so I don't know if when I use this, I recently no pan left behind this. I don't know if it's because the quality is just not there anymore because it's old, it's expired. I will say when I was using it on my eyes, I first of all didn't notice the Play-Doh smell, but I also didn't notice a reaction on my eyes by any means. A part of me wanted to keep like these 2 shades right here. I think these are really pretty, but I'm like, are those the ones causing the scent? I don't really want to worry about that. Plus, I have other indie eyeshadow palettes and single shadows in my collection that are just as good, if not more pretty than these. I just felt like the quality in this was pretty lackluster. I didn't feel like the mattes blended well together. It felt really dry. I used to really enjoy this palette, so I'm wondering if it's just a quality thing, like it's just expired, so it's just not performing well, but this was my least favorite of the year. Okay, then I have some post-it notes to remind me because these 2 are also decluttered. So I have the Nabla Platinum palette. It was the Nabla Cutie, a 6-pan eyeshadow palette. And I just was not having luck with the mattes in this palette anymore. They weren't blending well together. I did depot 3 of the shimmer shades, which are currently singles in my collection. So that was kind of nice that I could do that. There's some really beautiful, really metallic shades that came out of the Platinum palette. But using that no pan left behind style really forced me to kind of see that maybe I was reaching into that palette and I really thought I liked that palette because I really enjoy some of the shimmer shades in it, but the palette as a whole is just not that great in my opinion. I definitely have mattes similar to the mattes in that palette throughout my eyeshadow palette collection that perform better, so I decided to declutter that one. Another old palette in my collection was the Color Grade Queen of Hearts palette. I also depotted half of that palette, mostly the shimmer shades, plus I believe the Dusty Mauve matte shade, into a Z palette, and then I got rid of the rest. I noticed that the mattes definitely did not blend as well as they once did when I got back to that palette, and that is a palette that I waited over a year to purchase, and so I was so excited for that palette, and then I just did not use it as much as that I thought that I would. So that is another one that I will be decluttering. I know I did this in my palette ranking video and now I'm doing it again, but I'm not saying the numbers. And because we're in the last stretch of December, I just don't believe editing Steph is gonna put the numbers in. She'll shock us if she does, but if I'm not saying the numbers, I apologize, you guys. I feel like every year my goal is to be a better YouTuber and to link my products more and to like actually like go above and beyond in my editing. So it's a goal in 2024. Whether or not we follow through, we'll see. Next up, I have the Nabla Side by Side palette, and this was shocking to me because this, in my mind, was a favorite palette in my collection, and it definitely was one of my most used at one point. But using this, I just realized I don't feel like the mattes are all that great. Like there's definitely some mattes that really muddied together or were a little bit patchy on the eye. And then when I looked at this color story, it just didn't speak to me like it once used to. And I just do not get excited. I was not excited reaching into this palette trying to create looks to complete this palette. And I was like, you know what? The mattes in this palette aren't that special. The shimmers in this palette certainly aren't. I definitely like a lot of my other indie palettes more than this palette. So this one actually is a declutter as well, which is shocking because y'all know I was an absolute Nabla stan at one point in time, and now I like really like my Nabla baked cheek products, but their eyeshadow palettes or their eyeshadow formula just is not a favorite or a standout in my collection anymore, especially as I continue to dive even deeper into indie brands. Indie just, they do it right with eyeshadow palettes. I'm sorry, I'm noticing like this cheek, I'm just like a mess today. This cheek like is like way more pigmented, I feel like, than this. Why I'm pointing that out, because now you won't be able to unsee it. I don't know, maybe you already noticed it though, and I'm noticing it. Okay, next up, another one that I have decluttered is the Pat McGrath Rose Decadence palette. It was a 6-pan palette. Mine did have a pan in it, and I really loved this palette at one point in time, but I came to realize that I'm just not a like bright pink eyeshadow lover. I love a dusty pink, but when it comes to like true pinks on the eyes, I am just, that is a color that I don't use a whole lot on the eyes. So I did decide to declutter that one as well. I enjoyed the palette, but I also felt like there were a couple mattes in there that just were not blending as much as well as I remember them. I also don't think Pat McGrath makes the best matte, so I was good decluttering that one. And then the last decluttered palette that I have to share is the next ranked one, and it's the ColourPop Creamsicle Quad. I actually really enjoy the Creamsicle Quad. It's really beautiful. I think the ColourPop quads are really good quality. I just was finding that this just added another like choice to my collection. I like a smaller palette, but I also just like typically something more than a quad. Obviously, I felt super limited in the looks that I could create with this palette. And I'm so sorry, you guys. I had every intention of sharing looks that I created with each of these palettes alongside this video. I did recently post 100 looks with 100 palettes, so I'll leave that linked as well. But you know, my mind's turning for how I want to do things differently next year, and next year I will, in this video when I do my ranking, try and share like at least one look with every palette that I created. But not this year, I'm sorry. All right, next up, I believe we're at number 23. I believe we're at 23 in the ranking. I have my Natasha Denona Mini Biba. I have nothing against this palette, and actually I seem to always get at least one compliment when I wear this to work. It's just really basic, and I feel like it's one of those palettes from Natasha Denona that as I'm creating the look, I feel a little bit frustrated. Like I feel like things are not blending as I want them to, but then like 30 minutes to an hour after I finish my look, I actually really like it. Like I feel like it all like meshes well together. So I really don't have anything against this. I just have so many other palettes that I enjoyed using over this one. So that's why this one's ranking at number 23, did I say? And then shockingly, number 22 is actually a palette that I am decluttering. I recently shared, so why this one's ranking above one that I'm not decluttering, I don't know, you guys. But when I did my 100 looks, I did create, or I have a picture of a look that I created with the ColourPop Lush Life palette, and I was looking back and I was like, I actually really like that look. Like, do I really want to declutter this palette? But my reason for wanting to declutter this palette is as I used this in a no pan left behind manner, I noticed that a lot of the quality of the shades within this palette are really starting to decline. A lot of the shimmer shadows are a lot more crumbly. They just don't stay on the eyes like they once did. And in terms of the mattes, I really have the majority of these shades already in my collection. I might not have like this true cobalt blue, but this is probably my least used. In fact, it is for sure my least used shade in this palette. I think it's a beautiful palette and I really did love this at one point in time, but this one doesn't smell though. It doesn't smell. And side note, you guys, when I declutter palettes, I usually just bring the bin of palettes home to my mom's, and then it like sits there, and like maybe my mom takes one, maybe my sister takes one, maybe I have a friend that like tells me they want a specific palette, and then I'll like give them to my friends and family, but usually they just sit in that bin, so I can always like reclutter it back into my life if I really want to. 21, Melt Mary Jane. I love all the looks that I create using this palette. So frustrating to get there. I don't want to sound like a broken record because I said it so many times about this palette. I was excited to No Pan Left Behind this palette because I'm like, ooh, maybe I'll decide I want to declutter it. But I really loved every look that I created. Was there fallout everywhere? Was it really difficult to get there? Yup. But I can't get rid of it. So I do like this palette. And actually, like, if I'm going in terms of like looks created, I probably would rank this higher, but I really have to take into consideration how difficult this palette is to use. So that's why this one's ranking lower. And then coming in at number 20, I have my Natasha Denona Retro Glam palette. Mine looks a little bit different because I currently have been having some fun experimenting doing BYOPs using my Natasha Denona minis. So build my own palette. I'm like changing some of the shadows. This is not my build your own palette, but inevitably when you're like moving all your shadows around, other palettes end up looking differently too. I really like the Natasha Denona Retro Glam, and using it in a No Pan Left Behind manner really made me fall in love with it more. I want to hopefully No Pan Left Behind this palette again this year just to get even more familiar with it. I was looking up inspiration actually for this palette the other day and saw some really beautiful looks that I want to try. I enjoyed the looks that I created with this palette, but I will say sometimes I feel like this palette is a little bit outside of my comfort zone. So that's why I'm ranking this one at number 20. And then coming in at number 19, I have this one from Aether Beauty, this really beautiful mini rose quartz quad. I actually really enjoyed the look that I created using this palette. I created a look using all 4 shades, and I went on to repeat that look like a few days in like the same week because it was a really easy look that I could create to wear to work. But this is a very small quad. You're very limited in the looks you can create. So that's why this one's ranking at number 20. And then coming in at number 19, kind of similar to that, I have this one from Dose of Colors. It's in the shade Baked Browns, or the Baked Browns palette. It's a 5-tone, all matte, very monochromatic palette, but it serves a very purposeful purpose as well. So I really love this palette for what it is. It does have a lot of kick up, so I feel like that's not going to be for everyone, but clearly I enjoy this palette. I have 3 pans in the palette, and I feel like the pans are deeper in this palette. I am hoping to expand the pan and get more use out of this palette this year. I feel like this is quite old in my collection, so this one probably should not make it into 2025 alongside me, but we'll see. We'll see. I believe we're at number 18. I have the Huda Beauty Nude Medium palette. This is a really beautiful 9-pan palette. I love the Huda formula. I will say with the Obsessions palettes, sometimes the formula can be pretty hit or miss. This one I feel like is exceptional quality. I feel like it's really good. I really like the mattes. You definitely are going to get a more pink leaning kind of medium toned look with this. It is very monochromatic, but I always leave really enjoying the look that I create with the Huda medium palettes. I actually decluttered the Nude Rich, but it's at my mom's house and I'm thinking of pulling that one back in. I was happy to No Pan Left Behind this because I was kind of thinking about potentially decluttering this one as well, but then when I created my looks using this palette, I was like, yeah, I still love it. So I ended up keeping that. Coming in, are we at number 17? I have my Rowan 75 Degrees quad. I really love these Rowan quads. I rave about them on my channel. This would probably be my least favorite of the 3 that I have, but it's also my most used. It is really, really beautiful, but again, it's a 4-pan quad and they're all cream shadows, so I'm not really reaching into this palette to create a full look typically. I'm usually reaching into this as a complementary palette. I did reach for this palette quite a bit in 2023, and I'm actually planning to see if I can potentially pan this palette in 2024. We'll see. We shall see. But just the other palettes that I'm looking at in front of me that I'm ranking, I just enjoyed using a little bit more, had a little bit more fun with, was left with a little bit more variety. You will see a Rowan Quad though ranking above this. Number 15 is going to go to my Sugar Pill Fun Size palette. I love this palette. This is like the palette that made me fall in love with color. Just a little mini rainbow, like pastel yet bright neon. I know that's like an oxymoron palette, and it's just so fun in my opinion. I have the shade 8-bit on my eyes today, and I also created a rainbow look with this palette, which was very outside of my comfort zone this year, that I absolutely fell in love with. So this palette is always going to hold a place near and dear to my heart, because I feel like this is the palette that really made me want to start playing around with color a little bit more. So that one is my 15. Coming in at number 14, I have the Natasha Denona My Dream palette. This one actually is in its original state. This is what this looks like. This is a really, really beautiful palette, really exceptional quality. One of my favorites in terms of overall quality from Natasha Denona. I will say oftentimes I have a very specific look in mind when I go in to create something with this, and then I come out with it being like maybe a little bit more like fuchsia or a little bit more purple than I was anticipating, but I still always love the look that I create. It definitely is a little bit deeper, especially like I just wish maybe there was like one lighter shade that wasn't like a peachy sort of shade. That would be like my one complaint with this, but I really enjoyed playing around with this, and I'm really glad that I no pan left behind that, and would like to try and make it through my Natasha Denona collection in 2024, just because I feel like I've learned a lot again about my palette collection, using a palette as a whole, and really trying to just think in terms of using one palette to create a look. So that was really fun. And then coming in at number, I think we're on 13, I have the Kaleidos Escape Pod. Another palette that I believe I purchased this same year as the Sugar Pill palette. Another palette that really got me thinking differently about color and being more excited about color. I really had fun using this palette, no pan left behind as well. I will say I didn't really do like a rainbow look. Like I was reaching into this palette quite a bit, because I would like grab a couple shades here and grab a couple shades there. I love the like lid topper shades in this palette. I think are so beautiful. I really enjoy the shade Soiree, this really beautiful kind of lavender shade up here, like a neon lavender, so pretty. I do have a cobalt blue, which I love, and then just some fun oranges and that hot pink. So really enjoyed getting to know that palette a little bit more this year. Coming in at number 12, I have my Pat McGrath Utopian palette. And I really enjoy this palette. I do. I obviously get most use out of these two shades, the more special shades on the end, but I also really enjoyed this pink shade, as well as this is a really beautiful like gold lid topper. I'm excited to potentially no pan left behind this palette again, and really just try and think even a little bit differently in terms of like mixing and matching, or being a little bit more bold in what I create with this, rather than, I feel like I went with more neutral, just like standard looks with this palette, but I still really enjoyed it. Coming in at number 11, I feel like this might shock some of you because I love this palette. I've repurchased this palette. I love it so much, but I really, really love the top 10 just so much. So coming in at number 11, I have the Natasha Denona Mini Nude. It's a 5pan palette. I love it so much. This is like my favorite pair of sweatpants in palette form. Like just that thing, those sweatpants that you go to when you just like, you're ready to just lounge. Maybe you're not feeling the best. Maybe you like just worked so hard throughout the week and you're like, I'm giving myself like a lazy, relaxing Sunday, and you're just like, and you're in your, you know exactly the sweatpants you're gonna spend the day in. When I need a comfort, this is the palette I go to. It's easy. I don't have to think about this. I know exactly what I'm going to create, and I'm going to feel so pretty in it, just like I feel so pretty in my favorite sort of pair of sweatpants. All right, we are into the top 10. It was hard. It was so hard to pick my top 10, and I'm looking at these and I'm like, do I have them ranked how I want them ranked? I'm moving things around a little bit even right now. Okay, coming in at number 10, I have the Odin's Eye Hella palette. This was the first palette that Angie did in collaboration with them, and I absolutely love this palette. If I am wanting to like have fun with my makeup, I would rank this even higher. I do want to have fun with my makeup, but actually a lot of the palettes ranking above this are very neutral, but I just have like my go-to comfort looks. Whereas with this palette, I much prefer to like follow a tutorial. But I created some looks that I just absolutely loved using this palette this year. I hit pan on the shade Double Sided. I love that as an inner corner highlight. This year, I want to have even more fun more frequently with like the greens up here, or even like this matte yellow. Yellow is going to be my color this year. Like I want to do so many yellow eyeshadow looks. I don't know why. I'm like feeling really into the yellows. I feel like this was the year I really fell in love with blues. I mean, hello, we got blue on the eyes today. But I want to, you know, I want to explore yellows a little bit more this year. I also created a pink halo eye that I really enjoyed with this palette as well, and I had so much fun reaching into this palette. No Pan Left Behind style. This was my favorite palette of 2022, so it was really nice to get to play around with this again in 2023. And then coming in at number 9, I have the Fantasy Cosmetica Druid palette. This is such a beautiful, grungy palette. I am definitely interested in purchasing and trying more from Fantasy Cosmetica. Their special shades are truly just so special. I absolutely love these two shades right here, and even like layered on top of one another, just so beautiful. I definitely feel like I could have played around with this even more, and I'm very excited to also take this palette with me into winter. We're in winter, but it's not snowy out here, so like, are we in winter? I'm excited to take this with me into January. I'd like to play around with like this blue, like maybe something with like these two. I just have so many more ideas of looks that I can create with this palette that I haven't even yet. So I was very excited to get to use that No Pan Left Behind style, and it makes me even more creatively inspired to reach into this palette. Coming in at number 8 is the other Rowan 11, well, it's the Rowan 1111 quad, but the other Rowan quad I was talking about. Oh my goodness. Did I fall so hard for this palette this year? I already knew I liked this palette. This is another palette I repurchased. My other one got destroyed, and I went and immediately repurchased this one because I knew I had to have it in my life. My favorite shade is this like chunky pink, sparkly, creamy, textured, beautiful little pan of joy right there. But I really enjoy, I actually created a look using all 4 of these shades, which is why I'm glad that this palette rolled in, because it really forced me to be like, let me see if I can just create a look using all 4 of these. I love this. I will never stop loving that. Coming in at number 7, this is a classic love on my channel. We have the ABH Jackie palette. I love it so much. I've talked about this as being one of my favorite palettes in my collection for so long, and I really liked having to use this No Pan Left Behind style because it forced me to use these 6 shades, which typically get neglected. I have a pan in Big Wig because I was trying to do like a Franken shadow, and it didn't really work out so well, but I created a look using this palette as well as the Danessa Myricks Lightwork Volume 3, and I loved the purple look that I came up with that. I also can create one of my favorite warm neutral shades of life using this palette, so I did that, and it just, you know, it's a favorite, so it's still a favorite. Coming in at number 6, the Kaleidos Sashimi City. I don't want to go on and on. You guys know I love this so much if you watched any of my palette videos, I swear. When I rolled this in, I was like, oh, this will be so easy to No Pan Left Behind because I can use every single shade in one look. It's going to be beautiful. I love it. The lid topper shades are so sparkly and so beautiful. You can just pop them on your lids. I can literally create a look in 5 minutes using this palette, and it'll look like I spent an hour on my makeup. I love the Sashimi City palette, and to my knowledge, you can still get this. I think this is the only Futurism palette you can still get. I could be wrong. I didn't like check this morning. Highly recommend that. Number 5 goes to my Viseart Soleil La Plague palette. I was so excited when this rolled in because I definitely wanted to get some more use out of this palette this year. And so it kind of like gave me the excuse to do so. I actually created a yellow look this year using the yellows in this palette, and I absolutely loved it. And I did a little bit of this blue on the lower lash line. one of my favorite looks of the year, and I just am very interested. I didn't love Viseart, but then I gave it a try, another try with this palette. I don't know why this color story really spoke to me, and I found a newfound appreciation for Viseart because they have more of a buildable formula, which is something that actually works quite well for me. Like, it's definitely better for me to have a buildable formula. And there are definitely some other Viseart palettes that I have my eye on, but this is my number 5 in terms of the palettes I know Pan left behind it. Number 4 is the Natasha Denona Biba palette, and I'm so glad this got rolled into my project because this was a neglected palette in my palette collection that I used to love so much. So it really forced me to pull this back out and use it, and I created some looks that I just absolutely loved. Obviously they were like basic B sort of looks, but that's okay. Like, sometimes that is just what I love, what I feel most confident in. And it just reminded me of how incredible the quality is in this palette. I will say these are not, like, I could do without these 3 shades just because I'm not someone who's typically reaching for like a smoky silver look. But aside from that, I love everything else about this palette, and I'm just so glad that this got rolled in because it reminded me of how much I really love that palette and what great quality that is. And then coming in at number 3, I have my Natasha Denona Gold palette, which I knew I loved so much. I was so happy that this rolled in just to give me an excuse to use this palette more, and it really forced me to try and create, you know, more looks, or to think a little bit more creatively about this palette. I just am so in love with this palette. I feel like it has my absolute perfect matte brown shades that I could ever want or ever need or ever am looking for. And then I love the shade, well, I'm not gonna flip it over, I'm too lazy. I love this shade, this shade, this shade, and this shade for like a sparkly lid. It's so pretty, so pretty. I know you can't get this anymore, I'm so sorry, but Alter Ego does make a dupe palette that I personally have not tried, but I do love the Alter Ego formula. So if you're looking for this color story, I would recommend. I do have a code with Alter Ego, actually. It's just Steph. If you are looking to save any money, never any pressure, but I do have that code. Coming in at number 2, Danessa Myricks Lightwork Volume 3. I love this palette so much. I don't want to drone on about it because since I've owned this palette, I literally can't shut up about it. And I know you can't get this anymore, but it's such a special palette. It is definitely more of a companion palette for me because it's an 8-pan all shimmer palette, but I actually hit pan on the shade Polaris this year, which is really exciting. It's this really beautiful, like creamy green, beautiful shade. I am so glad this rolled into the project because it just gave me an excuse to create more looks using this palette, and I loved every single one of them. And then my number 1 palette that I know Pan left behind it this year is my Huda Beauty Rose Quartz palette. And had you have asked me going into 2023 to rank my Huda larger palettes, I may have told you that this probably would have ranked at the bottom. Now it is like my favorite Huda palette. I think it is so beautiful. I love the shimmer shades in this, those just ethereal, iridescent, beautiful shades. Obviously you have quite a few different textures and tones within this palette, as Huda Beauty typically does, but I just think every shade is so perfectly curated. I love this palette. It really made me think of this palette differently. I had so much fun creating looks. I really created, oh my gosh, there was a look that I created with like, I think it was Cosmic Love all over the eyes, which was like this deep, like purpley blue. I absolutely loved it, but there's so many other looks that I created with this palette that I love. I already cannot wait to pull this palette out. I'm thinking in February for February palette inspiration. Fell in love with this palette this year. But after that, you guys, those are the 29 eyeshadow palettes that I know Pan left behind it this year, aside from also every new eyeshadow palette that I brought in, and how I would rank them. I would love to know what was your favorite or least favorite palette that you used this year. Do you do a no Pan left behind? Let a girl know in the comments below. Other than that, thank you guys so much for sticking around to watch today's video and for supporting me and my channel as you guys always do. I love you guys so much, and I will catch you in my next video. Bye.